The Tuskegee Airmen have a long and varied history that is well documented through books and motion pictures. These pilots were the first Black Americans to take to the skies, paving the way for others and bringing the integration of the American Armed Forces closer, one step at a time. There are 4 events that you must know about to properly understand why these pilots are so important and what makes their service so remarkable. This is the story of these 4 key events. Before the Second World War, American society was segregated. There existed separate schools for Black and white Americans. There were separate universities. In some places, there were even separate water fountains and toilets. Within the United States Army, the same situation existed, where there were separate units for Black soldiers. However, there were no separate Black fighter squadrons. In October 1940, President Franklin Delano Roosevelt issued a directive that Black Americans would serve in proportionate numbers in the armed forces. This included the Army Air Forces. A program was established to train Black American pilots, and in March 1941, the 99th Pursuit Squadron was activated. His wife, Eleanor Roosevelt, was an advocate of equal rights for all Americans, regardless of race. While the U.S. Army Air Force was hesitant about a Black squadron and reluctantly cooperated, the support of the First Lady was of great value. While on a visit to the Tuskegee Institute, she noticed several airplanes flying nearby. She was taken on a flight by Allied Chief Anderson, and a photograph of her was snapped, which was of tremendous value to the program. It showed that they had the support of the First Lady, but also that the First Lady dared to fly with a Black American pilot. If she dared to fly with a Black American pilot, then what grounds did other Americans have to object to it? The U.S. Army Air Force initially established the 99th Fighter Squadron. Later, they established the 332nd Fighter Group, and lastly, the 477th Bombardment Group. The 99th Pursuit Squadron was redesignated as the 99th Fighter Squadron. It had been sent overseas and was attached to the 33rd Fighter Group under the command of William Meyer. He had issued a negative report about the 99th Fighter Squadron. In part, this read, "The general discipline and ability to accomplish and execute orders promptly are excellent. Air discipline has not been completely satisfactory. The ability to work and fight as a team has not yet been acquired. Their formation flying has been satisfactory until jumped by enemy aircraft when their squadron seemed to disintegrate. This has repeatedly been brought to the attention of the squadron, but attempts to correct this deficiency so far have been unfruitful. The unit has shown a lack of aggressive spirit that is necessary for a well-organized fighter squadron. It is my opinion that they are not a fighting caliber of any squadron in the group. They have failed to display the aggressiveness and desire for combat that are necessary for a first-class fighting organization. It may be expected that we will get less work and less operation time out of the 99th than any squadron in the group." Meyer had based his report on the first few combat experiences of the 99th Fighter Squadron. An investigation followed, but it showed that there were no discrepancies between the 99th Fighter Squadron and other P-40 squadrons in the Mediterranean theater of operations. It wasn't until 27 and 28 January 1944 that the 99th Fighter Squadron could show its worth. On that day, the Luftwaffe was active over the skies of Anzio. A flight of 12 P-40s spotted 15 Focke-Wulf 190s dive bombing at the Anzio beaches. A swirling melee ensued, and within several minutes, 5 German airplanes were knocked out of the sky. As Major Roberts recounted, "We've been looking forward to such a happening, but this is the first time in 5 months that we've encountered enemy opposition." The whole show lasted less than 5 minutes. It was a chasing battle, as the Germans were always on the move. "We poured hell into them." Lieutenant Willie Ashley recounted, "I saw a Focke-Wulf 190 and jumped directly on its tail. I started firing at close range, so close that I could see the pilot. After blasting away with all my ammunition, I saw the enemy plane smoking and fire flaming from its left side. The remaining German pilots fled the melee and headed for home." Later that day, another patrol flew over Anzio, and again they engaged the Luftwaffe, shooting down 3 more German planes. The next day, 28 January, the Luftwaffe struck the beaches of Anzio again, and the 99th was there to attack them. In the chaotic battle, where split-second decisions needed to be made, as recounted by Curtis C. Robinson, When we reached the beach, I heard a loud blast in the back of my ship. I pulled up and looked back but saw nothing. I looked around and all the planes in my formation had disappeared. When I looked down, I could see all the planes way down below engaged in a battle. I started to dive for the scene of the battle, but shortly after beginning my dive, an enemy aircraft shot across my plane. I immediately opened fire, but just as I began to fire, Charlie Hall crossed in front of me. He was firing away at the enemy ship. I just knew I had hit Charlie's ship. I turned and followed Charlie and saw his shot hitting the enemy aircraft. The enemy aircraft finally spun into the ground. When I returned to base, I was anxious to see Hall's plane because I was sure I had damaged it in the battle. I was happy to find out that I had missed, and I was most happy to verify his victory. However, the days had not been without casualties. Lieutenant Bruce was reported as missing in action while another pilot had bailed out. A third made a crash landing back at the base. Regardless of the casualties, in 2 days, the 99th had shot down 12 German aircraft. It showed the world what the 99th could do. As Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, the commander of the 332nd Fighter Group, recounted, "We immediately received news of the 99th aerial victories over the Anzio beachland on 27 and 28 January, just days before our landing. This came as a tremendous shot in the arm. The glamour of a quick succession of aerial victories immediately produced a wave of recognition for the 99th and other black airmen in the theater. No number of bombs expertly placed on ground targets or in support of ground troops could have produced comparable acclaim. The 99th had finally earned its place in the U.S. Army Air Force and had shown the ferocity of the black pilots." In 1945, due to the pressure of the Allies, the German Air Force desperately tried to find new effective weapons. One of the airplanes they put into production was the Me-262, the world's first jet fighter. On 24 March 1945, the 332nd Fighter Group had its longest mission. It would take off at Ramitelli, Italy, and fly to Berlin, escorting bombers in an attack on a tank factory in Berlin, a distance of 1,600 miles, 2,575 kilometers. 59 P-51 Mustangs took off that morning, and 54 of them pushed north. 38 of them linked up with the Allied bombers, and they were supposed to be relieved by other escorts. But these other escorts never showed up. The 332nd Fighter Group continued with a mission until they came across 25 enemy fighters, including the fearsome Me-262. One of the pilots who shot down a jet fighter that day was Roscoe C. Brown, who recounted, "I shot down an Me-262 over the heart of Berlin. Near the end of the war, we went there to bomb a tank factory on the edge of the city. We didn't know we were going to meet any enemy fighters. Then we heard them. They had jets coming out to attack the bombers. I flew down beneath the bombers, turned away from a jet so he didn't see me, then turned back and blew him up." On that mission from the 332nd Fighter Group, 2 pilots went missing, 2 more were captured, while another reached the Soviet lines. Despite these losses, the group successfully carried out its mission and protected the bombers from the enemy fighters. It's a credit to the dedication of these black American pilots who continued with their mission to protect the bombers and engage German aircraft attempting to break up the attack. The unit was awarded with the Distinguished Unit Citation for their efforts, made possible by the dedicated ground crew. The 477th Bombardment Group was activated late in the Second World War on 15 January 1944. The group was armed with the B-25 Mitchell bomber, which had 4 squadrons: the 616th Bombardment Squadron, the 617th Bombardment Squadron, the 618th Bombardment Squadron, and the 619th Bombardment Squadron. It was the only black American bombardment group in the Second World War. Among their members were new trainees, but also pilots who had previously served with the 99th Fighter Squadron and the 332nd Fighter Group. The instructors were white officers, some of whom had served in combat, while others had not. The commanding officer of the outfit, Colonel Robert Selway, endorsed segregation policies and was not a good choice for the unit. He refused to promote black officers, and there was a lot of racial friction. While at Freeman Field, Indiana, Selway created 2 officers' club. One was for trainees and the other was for instructors. It just so happened that all black officers were trainees, while all white officers were instructors. It was a clear lie, and it was also a violation of Army policy, which states that all officers could use all officers' clubs on base. On the night of 5 April 1945, 3 black officers entered the White Officers Club and were arrested after refusing to leave. That night, 61 black officers were held in custody for entering the club. It was a coordinated, non-violent attempt to integrate the Officers Club. It resulted in a precarious situation, and Selway wished to resolve it by ordering Base Regulation 85-2. It assigned specific housing, mess, and recreational facilities to certain officers. Selway then ordered each officer to sign a form confirming they had read and understood the regulation. 101 out of around 400 officers refused to sign it. As Hiram Little of the 477th recounted about being requested to sign, "Before I even went in there, I knew I wasn't going to sign that order. I didn't talk to anybody about it, but I knew I wasn't going to sign that order, that I was going to bow down willingly to segregation, because I'd been doing that all my life, and I was sick of it." The 101 black officers who refused to sign were arrested for insubordination and taken to Godman Army Airfield, Kentucky. General Hunter interpreted these actions as a conspiracy to revolt. Meanwhile, Congress and the black press became aware of this situation, making also the general public aware of it. The Army then decided to release all the officers involved, as well as replace Colonel Selway. Just 3 officers appeared before the court: Lieutenant Shirley R. Clinton, Roger C. Terry, and Marsden A. Thompson for resisting arrest. Only Terry was fined, having to pay $150 for pushing a marshal. To replace him, Colonel Benjamin O. Davis took over command, but it was quite a difficult task. As Davis recounted in his memoirs, "Challenges I had, both in magnitude and number, 17 months after activation, the 477th still had not achieved combat readiness. And we were scheduled for deployment in the Far East by 1 October 1945, just 3 months away." At the root of all the problems was, of course, racial conflict between black trainees and white supervisors. The morale of the 477th had started at a low ebb and hit bottom 2 months before my arrival, with accusations of mutiny and the pending court-martial of several of its officers. In 1995, the U.S. Air Force exonerated those who had been arrested, finally removing reprimand letters from their records and expunging convictions. The Tuskegee Airmen brought integration of the U.S. Armed Forces one step closer during World War II by going toe-to-toe with the mighty German Luftwaffe over Anzio in January 1944. Then again on their longest mission over Berlin in March 1945. They also fought against Jim Crow on the ground with the Freeman Field Mutiny in April 1945. When examining the history of the Tuskegee Airmen, the 477th Bombardment was never employed in combat, despite its long training. The 99th Fighter Squadron was judged unfairly in training until it had the opportunity to engage the German Luftwaffe before it could be recognized as a valuable asset instead of a propaganda tool. They served their country regardless of the circumstances and adversity they faced from their own nation. By war's end, what made the United States the most feared fighting force in the world was its combined use of all its manpower and soldiers' talents across industry, technology, army, navy, and air power. Racial segregation undermined this unique advantage and only delayed the United States' mobilization. As any tactician knows, to defeat the enemy, you must plan and fight more effectively than your enemy across logistics, training, and in the field of battle. We remember the Tuskegee Airmen as patriots for their country and recognize them as remarkable trailblazers who rose above both discrimination at home and the skies of Europe as heroes against all odds. Thank you for watching this episode of the Militology channel. If you liked it, please share, like, and don't forget to hit the bell icon to be notified of what's next. Dive deeper into the history of the Tuskegee Airmen with Samuel Dacorte's Tuskegee Airmen Dogfighting with the Luftwaffe and Jim Crow. Links to purchase the book in the description of the video and pinned comment.